property barons, how do they get to acquire so much land whilst the ordinary hardworking citizen has none?
I won't call him a baron, and for fear of being sued, I won't mention his name. He says, Zimbabwe, greatest theft in it on a pencil. What owner land?
What's your take on the current property market in the country, and how does a young man out there say, well, and how long would it probably take him to actually purchase a piece of land?
Yeah, you can talk about in this market cheap stands, 12,000, 15,000. Where does a security guard get it? Where does an intern get it? Where does an articled clerk get that kind of capital to just start? Ngotenga stand is part one. Not very popular. I'll be roasted on Twitter. You're elitist, you're a gatekeeper, it's not like that. But the maths of it, that's Africa's biggest crisis.
Can you explain that whole waiting list? Is it a scam? What's going on? I know Zabuda must in there.
Hey, yeah. You didn't prepare me for these questions.
Are you still... Me, I'm a Manchester United fan, and are you still a Chelsea fan?
Absolutely, undeniably, unshakably.
Better right now.
Yeah, I don't want to be one of those guys who relies on history and then goes back to
there
stats.
are only two teams in the world, Manchester United and others. And locally, you're still a Buccaneer fan?
South African local, absolutely. Zimbabwe, Dimbare has to be the squad.
Hey, speaking of Orlando Pirates, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that the SA justice system will ever find... Because I know you were touched about how they murdered Senzo Meyu.
Sure.
How do you feel like they will ever close that case?
Look, can I ask you what you had for breakfast and the shirt you were wearing 2 weeks ago? Now, this case is 10 years old, and you're calling witnesses to say what happened 10 years ago. I don't think so. I'm not holding my breath.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another exciting episode of the Bold Exchange. Before I go any further, I really would love to thank you guys for watching wherever you're watching from, whether you just smoked a blunt and you're relaxing, whether you're using your work Wi-Fi to actually just block out your irritating boss. Thank you for watching. We really appreciate you. Today, I'm joined by, he calls himself a property consultant. He is a qualified property consultant, regional, international property consultant. Kura Chihota, how are you doing, man?
I'm so thriving and so blessed. By international, amen.
We're manifesting it.
Amen. I receive.
In your own words, tell me, what do you do? What do you do?
Okay. I guess at my core, I'm trying to put as much real estate in as many people's hands to transform as many lives. That's what I wake up to do. So that can be talking in a boardroom to a corporate to say, look, your portfolio needs to be updated in this kind of direction. It can be a listed company and say, okay, guys, how are we organizing for value? Are we issuing more shares? Are we buying this portfolio? Or it can be literally a go-go who says, Mwana wangu ndinemba, I no longer have a husband, Mwana wangu ari Australia, what should I do with the property? So it's sitting down, having a cup of tea, and then mapping a pathway from where you are to where you want to get through. And if it's got a property angle, then I'll consult on that.
I mean, no one wakes up at 16 and says, I want to be a property consultant. So at high school, give me context to the man that's sitting in front of me right now. Like, who is Kura Chihota in high school? What's the world like around?
Wow. I went to a funny little school not far from here, founded by Father Hartman many years ago, Hartman House or St. George's College. I was a geek.
You're George's boy.
Forgive me.
No, George's. Oh yeah, we're there, but you know what I mean? Like, there's another George's boy who's supposed to come through later on the season. But okay, continue.
Yeah. So I was a geek. I was a skinny little kid. I think I was the second smallest guy in the class right until Form 4. Then Form 4, I went into boarding. And then in boarding, it's either the strongest or the sharpest mouth. So I think a lot of my personality developed that I couldn't beat up people, but I could out-talk them, out-think them. I was never a sportsman. If you go and look at the yearbook, I was in under 14C, D teams, but Pakutara Chirunga, I was there. Debate, drama, public speaking, that was my forte. My A-levels, I did accounting, history, and geography. I think geography was the basis for a real estate understanding. Then a lady my mom went to church with then said to my mom, "Hey, why doesn't Kura come and work with my husband?" That was Pat Mullet. The company back then was called Redfin Mullet and Company, property valuers. So I walked into a job and I was measuring buildings, being given a plan to how big is this, measure, my calculations, and then you graduate and you start filing maps. Then you go along with the valuers, my inspections of properties, and then I started doing the local qualification. I can't remember, it was called the auctioneers, estate agents, and valuers exams back in those days. And then I got to enjoy it and just made the decision I want to do this properly. And I picked South Africa, close by. I think it was 3-1 back then, the rate. So it was affordable. And then I picked a BCom. I had a choice between Stellenbosch University and Wits to do a BCom in property economics. I picked Wits because it was English versus Afrikaans. And got there in 1994 and did a BCom in property economics. I failed statistics 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 times to get my degree. So I've got my BCom degree in property economics with insurance and risk management, and then other subjects like corporate finance. Then South Africa was South Africa then. If you were black and had your stuff together, the corporate was open to you. I started working for some guys doing deals downtown, just as you've got now in Harare, people leaving the city, going to the northern suburbs. That was really strong. So the company I was working with, there were some white guys, Andrew and James, and they said, "Look, why don't you work the CBD?" So I was sourcing the deals in town and then moving them out of town, and that literally paid for my last year of varsity. I made about 65 grand rand back in those days doing that, about $20,000. It's not bad for a pimply-faced little Zimbabwean from across the border, and just stuck around. And property has been natural to me. So from broking, putting people together, to more the academic side, I did asset management. Asset management is a property manager gives you a report and he says, "I've collected this amount of rent from this tenant." Asset management is a level higher than that, where you're saying, is this building the right one that we should be owning? Should we reconfigure it to get more rent? From a portfolio, should we harvest this one and reinvest in the new and upcoming? So it's more strategic. So I started doing asset management. I was back in Johannesburg at the time. Then a couple of board positions opened up. I was made deputy chairman of Johannesburg Housing Company, which had about 4,500 units of flats in downtown CBD, and was building stuff. I was on the investment committee there. What do we buy? What do we sell? How do we do that? Then the big one for me was a REIT, Real Estate Investment Trust. They asked me to join the board from listing, from IPO. So it was a tiny company, 1.6 billion rand of assets. And we grew that portfolio to 54 billion rand. And it was just, my mind was blown that, if you put the right product in the right way with the right structures, my mind was just blown wide open.
Like like the way you just articulated that, guys, we should clip this up and actually make it your LinkedIn intro video.
Thank you. Good idea.
I want to just track back a bit. Like you talk about failing 7 times to get your, and what keeps you, what then, you get down 1 time and then you come back 7 times. Like, what was going on in your mind then? What was the driving force behind that?
Hey, good people. I think my career has always been guided or inspired by good people. So one of the jobs that I got, the chairman said to me, so he looks at the transcript and you got your academics, you've done all of the stuff, but it says has not met the requirement for graduation. And he says, "My boy," this is the late Eric Molobi, he says, "My boy, don't get lost in this money game in Augustgor. Finish school." And it was a moral suasion. Yeah, I can't let him data down, and I'll do that. So it's the reality. If you've got a degree, if you've started something, finish it and do it.
And tell me about you get back and you're now at NASA, right?
Yeah.
Of
course.
Let's talk about we grew up around our parents didn't earn much, but they earned enough to actually then afford proper rentals and then probably rent to buy, and and there was like cheap rentals, and the pensions were worth something.
Yeah.
Talk to me about where did we get it wrong currently, where our pensions seem to be worthless, and pension like, as in, is it a wise idea right now to act? Where did NASA get it wrong? Because you are the property.
I was, and that's a big question that you're asking, maybe the wrong guy. But in terms of financial assets, any system, right? An economy generates a surplus. If you're employed, there's supposed to be some saving for your future. That saving for your future, the business school guys will tell you it's the capital formation cycle. Savings from Alex and Kura go and get put in a financial institution. That financial institution makes investments. Maybe it buys property, maybe it buys shares, and then that provides capital for more employment so that Kura and Alex have a job. So it's a circle that goes round and round. So when you dislocate a financial system, as we did, I started working. Thank goodness mom told me, when you start working, you get a policy with one of the life assurance companies. So even I had the pension erosion, because by now, actually, I'm 52. By 55, I should have been getting, I think, $36,000, if I remember my policy correctly. So if you don't have an underlying stable currency, which is measuring and storing value, it evaporates. And I try and explain this to my colleagues on the other side of the border in Limpopo, that they can't not contemplate not putting money in the bank and the money not staying there and the money not buying things. In Zim, I'd love to say we're unique, but we're not. Argentina, Weimar Republic, where hyperinflation just destroys the pieces of paper that money is based on. So if there is this destruction of value, we can't keep the score. We're soccer fans. If there's no referee and he's writing down Ningi Arawa Pen at this time and the score is this, you can't then come and claim against it. So our pensions got evaporated away because the thing we're using to evaluate the value of those things became useless. So we're all in the bundu and we don't know. So the numbers, when they became 27 numbers on a piece of paper on a computer somewhere, you could never access it. You could never go and withdraw or transfer, what have you. So I think the money evaporated. That's my little layman's understanding, and it's really painful. I've got relatives. She's late now. My aunt, she was a doctor, and she had quadrillions, whatever they are. And then to wake up and tell her, Tete, there's nothing for you in the bank anymore. She just couldn't understand it.
How was that? How was that, like, as one of the property investors at that time, and how was that, like, emotionally on you, like, when you know what these people could be my aunts, could be my granny, could be my mom, and how was that on you? Like, how do you deal with that whole phase?
It was tough. There was a particular moment. So I'm a proud father of 2 boys. My first son, the delivery, he was born in hospital, all great. He was born by C-section because the dilation was slow. Then he comes out and he's jaundiced, right? So you now need to put the kid under ultraviolet light to stimulate the liver production and all the rest of it. So I was grateful to be in South Africa for that. So my heartbreak moment, and I'm not a religious man, I will tell you that, but I did have a moment when I was in a NASA hospital in Bulawayo, the Exposé hospital, and you see the facility and it's there. And it was created with a purpose. And I felt my purpose was to bring these assets to life, to provide life to other people, because there's no reason why I left Sandton to come to Zimbabwe just to be more like the same. So my mission connected to say, why are you here? What can you do to have impact? And sharing and give back sounds so cliche, but really, andinakungosikwa just to be Kura Chihota and live and die without helping or doing something or having a skill set or sharing knowledge or whatever it is. So it became very personal to me. So I believe, and I tried to be a custodian of those assets, because that pension was going to look after. And as soon as unoshanda kunasa, obviously Hamadzako will come and say, Inzwa Ningi, Dinama Pepa Amdara, can you help us? And this is corruption, but just to understand the process, how do I claim? The NASA Act is quite clear. If you've done 120 months of contribution, you've got a claim to collect your pension. So it was very living life made real to try and ameliorate people's conditions. You've worked, you've saved, get something back. And NASA, for a period after the hyperinflation nonsense, was the only pension-paying institution. So at least it was doing something, and it did something for a lot of people. Could have done it more, could have done it better, but it was the lighthouse and the rock that people could say, we're getting something.
All right, interesting. Like, so now let's get into a subject that I'm really curious about, and I'm planning on going off-grid in the next 5 to 6 years. How safe is the Sabuku deal?
Oof. Right. For context, Sabuku deals are the reality, right? I can tell you kuti kumusha kwangu is Goromonzi, right? Then we can have an argument, am I patrilineal or matrilineal? Because Goromonzi is where my father is buried, but that's where my grandmother is buried, and it's not where my grandfather is buried. So we can go to, but Goromonzi used to be that place over there, 32 Ks, but it's now 32 Ks, and you can drive on a double lane tar road to get there. And you...
D4D that.
Honda Fit is my steez,
All right.
So the areas that are around Harare have come under significant pressure for people to be accommodated. Right. So where my Mbuya's homestead is, where my Bamdiki, my Nini's, their homesteads, they've been there since time immemorial. I came into the country first in 1976, and they've still got their plots of land, and they're doing what they're doing. But what used to be a acre, English bundles are running out. What used to be a hectare plot is now being subdivided. And in theory, it's the correct thing. Baba Mdiki has 4 kids, then he goes to Sabuku and he says, Ndaku Kamura for my child. So that was supposed to be a local guy in a local condition, understanding his people. Now you've got that wonderful thing called money. And you had, call it Muramba China, call it US dollar inflation, pushing people out of renting in Glenview, and 500 square meters is plenty. So a guy wants to build his 2 rooms and then avoid a rental outlay, and he wants to buy a piece of land. That buying the piece of land becomes difficult because the Sabuku, you can buy him a bottle of whiskey, you can present an affidavit, you can get a receipt, you can do all of the stuff that looks okay. But in essence, he does not have the right to, in property we use the term alienate land. You can't sell that land. There's a right to occupy for the residents. You know, the last 3 digits, Pachitupa will tell you, in V43, I'm under Chief Chimanikire, so this is the area that I belong in. And this is my chief who I can talk to get that allocation. But it's a right to me because I'm a descendant of that area. When you pop up with B42 from wherever else, there's now a question mark. And the local councils, I take Goromonzi, but you can repeat for Zimba, Manyame, whatever other rural district council. There's a challenge where Vaui, people are just coming in and buying, and their IDs are not tying up. So your Sabuku deal, you might get away with it for a bit, but they're quite clear. The powers that be have said, no, we are tidying up this whole process, and they want to see an audit, and they want to know who got the land and why, and Zimba.
And so for me, kuti avoid, because so for me to actually avoid, it's hard work to actually have a structure up and roofed and stuff, and then for you to just see a bulldozer through that, it's like really disheartening. What are the processes and steps that one can take to actually purchase property in Zimbabwe?
Okay, so we always argue that our property prices are crazy, right? But the property prices are crazy because I think the secure title, having a title deed that Kura sold to Alex for 100,000, and we registered it at the deeds office, and everybody knows that is the securest form of title that we have in the country. So a title deed, as much as people want to go and they think it's a piece of paper, it is sacrosanct. It is an absolute right. There are few absolute rights. You don't have the absolute right to peace and freedom. The ZRP can walk in here and say, Alex, and you can be arrested. A title deed, there are few circumstances that you can be dispossessed of it. So with that as absolute security, everything else becomes lesser and lesser. And when it's lesser, then we get into arguments. He said, she said, my courts, my possession, your possession, it becomes weaker. So the necessity of being clear of what is available in town with a title deed, it's surveyed and what have you, that's one price. If you go outside of that, you're now seeing other instruments, and there are things like a developer session. A developer may have the right to subdivide a farm, and then he has obligations. The council says, yeah, go ahead, put these 200 stands, but Tangawaisa Road, Magets, Mvura, Suar, Connecta Kupi. So for Alex to get the rights that the developer has promised you, the developer still has to perform. So if the developer doesn't perform, you are at the bottom of the chain, because he is supposed to have done this to get the permission from the council to be able to transfer the deed onto you. You may have an agreement with him, but that's a personal agreement because it has not yet been fulfilled and it has not lived up to the expectations of council, so they won't let him give you the title deed. So you might be out of money, you might have the possession, you might have put the money into the structure, but you're not yet there. So it becomes insecure. So there's a pricing difference between the very secure and the insecure. And the way you want to do, or the way you want to secure your rights, is by always asking the questions. Whose land is it? Who's giving me authority to be here? What right do they have to give me that authority? What conditions can they give me that authority on? And then unotamba wakachenjea.
You know, like, so like my producer always says, I'm the king of conspiracy theories. Like, tell me, what's going on there? Like, is it one person who's having all this property? Like, and let's talk about like property barons. You know what I mean? I grew up in Chitungu. There was a guy called Mabamba land. Like, every corner, I think you owned half of two. You know, you always hear like Aningi owns the whole that area and whatever. Like, tell me about property barons. How do they get to acquire so much land while the ordinary hardworking citizen has none?
Okay, so I won't call him a baron, and for fear of being sued, I won't mention his name. But he says, Zimbabwe, greatest theft in Penzura. What owner land, right? And yeah, so real estate is essentially about rights, right? It's your right to this piece of ground to be able to do a house, a school, a shopping center, and then your right to collect rental. So these rights are granted by people. If you go back and look at the greatest corruption in China, it's at the municipal level where the government has decided Taguida, Guangzhou, right? And we're giving this place rights to be a city and do all the rest of it. Wakabata land will be the municipality. And then the municipality is like a popular girl in the club. Guys, they'll be saying, hey guys, can we get that piece of land? And then it's bribery and corruption. So the creation of a lot of land rights. And we have the Uchena Commission report, which has only been released in summary, where peri-urban farms were accessed by the elite and then subdivided and sold to a prejudice to the fiscus of $3.5 billion. So where that is, it's in the higher offices. When the higher offices decide to pronounce on that and say, this is what happened, then we'll have the answer to who the land barons are, what they did, and why they did it.
Let's talk about the city of Harare. A lot of subdivision happening. Cluster 35. So, like, I'm actually, fun things that I'm actually having monkeys come through. No, I'm being for real. Like, where I stay, the monkeys that come through to my place was like the forest that used to be the Madokeros and whatever is no more there. Tell me, what's the policy on subdivisions from the Harare City Council?
Okay, so I was recently at Town Hall where the mayor and his executive staff were explaining the cluster policy, call it the cluster policy. Starting with the Constitution says there shall be accommodation for everybody. You have a right to have a safe place to stay. Then we go to national government. National government will tell you there's a Zimbabwe Human Settlements Policy document that will say land is finite. Agricultural land is finite. We don't want to, and you see it when you're going out along the Kariba Road. You've got Westgate and what have you. Then you've got productive farms. So you don't want all of your farms where you've been growing potatoes and market gardenings to disappear. You want that to be maintained as farmland. So the policy makes cognizance of that. Then they say that the boundaries of the city are defined and they're not expanding. So if you're not expanding, but more and more people are coming into town, the policy is to put more people per square meter in existing space rather than making the town go bigger. That makes perfect sense, because to pull another kilometer of road, to do another substation, to pull sewer, additional ponds, water pipes is going to cost money. Why don't we make better use of what exists right now? So the policy is densification. So densification means more people on a particular piece of land than was there before. So the guideline policy is that Kumadales, if you've got stands of 1,000 square meters and above, currently, you can go and do subdivisions or creating clusters so that the land shares about 500 square meters. In areas that are smaller than that, they're talking about land shares of being 300 to 400 square meters, Kunana, Tinwald, and what have you. So the idea is to put more people on the land within the existing boundaries of the city.
And how does that, are we then building supporting infrastructure for that to actually happen? Like, as in, you just look at just the traffic congestion. It's actually as a result of you having 2 new suburbs just popping up, and you've got, like, out of the blue, you now have 20,000 more people. Like, are we as a council creating, are we creating and building infrastructure that can actually help with that?
So we have chicken and egg situation, and everything happens in a context. So it's a council's job to invest in infrastructure. But where does the council get money from? You and I as ratepayers. So when that permit is issued to do that cluster or any subdivision, panodiwa endowment. Endowment is 10% of the value of that development is supposed to be paid to the council. And in theory, it's supposed to be put into a ring fence fund to improve that area. But we've got a chicken and egg situation where council doesn't have the capacity. So this is another reason why Zim property is so expensive, because developers are having to do off-site infrastructure. So I'll give you an example. Village Walk in Borrowdale, just up the road. For them to get their permit,
location, man.
just up the road, because we're in. For them to get their permit, they had to plug into sewer, right? The sewer is about 1 kilometer away, and it runs down a certain road, and that certain road is Edinburgh Road. And no surprise, because now you've got sewer, you've now got the ability to apply for and receive a permit to do the clusters that you see there. And I think there are about 10 kind of developments that have gone on in that area, and plenty more coming. So you put it on one developer to provide the infrastructure, and then that unlocks opportunities for other developers. So the city is saying we can fund development by having, it's not a private, you gave me vodka in here instead of just water, private-public partnership. But the user must pay. And the endowment is a way of doing that. But then the housing policy that I stated earlier clearly states that off-site infrastructure is the responsibility of national government, and then in municipality, it's the responsibility of the municipality. But that's policy. We don't eat policy. You and I, tikadaguita something, we must move, and we're going to make it move by using our resources, but we only can recoup those resources from those who buy from us.
And what's your take on the current property market in the country, and how does a young man out there say, well, and how long would it probably take him to actually purchase a piece of land in this country?
Property ownership is been the single biggest transformative thing I've seen in people's lives. After education gives you access to a job gives you access to cash flows, gives you the ability to leverage and buy property, right? So I think this is at the core of what we're aiming to be about and do. So Joe average, we're in an exclusionary situation where if you went to the deeds office downtown Harare, I don't believe we have 300,000 registered properties in the deeds office. So think of all the people as households in Zimbabwe. If you call us 15 million, let's say half of those are economically active over the age of 18. And then of those, there's an income level that can afford a piece of property. We are well behind for a guy to, and you can talk about in this market, cheap stands Zima 12,000, 15,000. Where does a security guard get it? Where does an intern get it? Where does an articled clerk get that kind of capital to just start? Ngotenga stand is part one. Uchazowaka, is a slab, uchatenga zvidina, and design. It's a really tough space that we are missing out on creating so much value. If things were cheaper, more affordable, if there were subsidies, there's so many examples across the world. In Singapore, if you start working, their NASA is not actually a NASA. Their NASA is a housing scheme, so that after a period, your reward is we will subsidize you to get into a house, because household formation is or property ownership is such a cornerstone for an individual's balance sheet. So I am not seeing currently the economic circumstances that Joe average, the average Zimbabwean, has a line of sight to own a titled property in an urban area. Not very popular. I'll be roasted on Twitter. You're elitist, you're a gatekeeper, it's not like that. But the maths of it, that's Africa's biggest crisis. And I keep going to the African Union Housing Finance Organization and trying to understand who is doing what, so that we can have some sort of innovation to say, how do we provide access for people at affordable levels? I'm grateful to see that the likes of institutions like Shelter Afrique have given CBZ 15 million line of credit to try and make that cost of capital lower. And if the cost of capital is lower, then you and I as users should be able to access capital and do something that is affordable. But it's still hard.
And what can banks do? Because I'm seeing the banks are not helping us also with the high interest rate when you're trying to actually say, can I buy this against a loan and stuff? What can financial institutions in this country do when it comes to actually helping out the situation?
Sure. So banks are in a tough spot. Banks internationally are supposed to match long-term savings with long-term borrowings. But if you've given the bank and said, guys, those Obamas, those Benjamins, you can only use them until 2023, they have absolutely no incentive to make anything available for 2031. So when you and I walk into a bank, if I go to Bank A in South Africa, they'll look at me and credit assess me and they say, Kura, we can lend you this amount of money for 30 years.
Are you talking about ABSA when you say Bank A?
This is not a sponsored podcast, so Bank A.
All right.
Because there's 30-year money, right? And that 30-year money has a reasonable price to it, and we can do a deal. And then the repayments, because Gaya Chkwere 30 years, ka repayment kacho kadiki. Now, just mathematically, not even comparing the cost of money. When you now come to Zim and you say, dear Bank B, and you can make up whichever bank you want it to be in Zimbabwe, can I get a mortgage loan? And they tell you, you have to pay all of it back in 5 years. Just imagine the repayment. So the term is so short because they can't make it longer than 5 years. So the repayments become crazy.
Wow. Talk about your stay in SA and the property and the property market there, and how much property is in Black people's hands. Because like you always you hear a political party always talk about. Our people don't own the means of economy, the means of production, and there's issues like housing. How crazy is the housing crisis in SA?
Okay, so the housing crisis, and you've touched on a couple of areas. I love statistics, and I love South Africa for its readily available statistics. They have about 7 million properties in the deeds office. Remember, in Zimbabwe, we've got 300,000. So Guyama pressures, like I say, NSA. Of that 7 million, about 60% of it is worth less than 1.5 million rand, $80,000 less. Then within that space, 2/3 of that about are not clusters, sectional title units, by flats.
Yeah.
Then inside there, the biggest single buying group are black females, averaged about the age of 37. So they're economically active. You need to show a bank statement and credit worthiness, and you have to have a credit score of about 600 to qualify for property. But that to me is indicating there's employment, there is stability, and there's available finance. Those, if I was having a perfect petri dish to create real estate environments that work. On this side of the border, we don't have that stable employment, affordable credit. We've got 2 credit bureaus here, but their information is a little thin on the ground. But the economically active people are few. So the South African market, just as we have here, there's an affordability crisis. Even if I tell you that at the very bottom of the market, the South African government had a policy, they're trying to move away from it now, of the RDP. The RDP is literally from ground up, service the stand, build the house, and hand you the keys. I remember laughing as a Zimbo in South Africa, as you do, when Zuma was giving, politicians love cutting ribbons and giving away things. Zuma handed this Mdara the key. And then the Mdara refused to take the key.
Like, what do you want?
Imbai finish wanani. I'm like, oh my lord. So South Africa is interesting, and a light bulb came on for me, where just as you've seen here in Zimbabwe, you've got the presidential title deed scheme, and a lot of those are conversions of old municipal properties that are being handed to long-term tenants, right? And they've been given a title deed. So that program exists in South Africa as well. The municipality has had a tenant for 40 years, and they don't want to keep on maintaining it, and it's got no value in their books, so they're trying to transfer it to the occupant. That occupant has been offered that property, and just in my attorneys monosigner. The attorney's transfer fee is 3,000 rand, right? 250, not even $250. Hana Mario. Kuti aone imba for free, right? So at the very bottom end of the market, pressure. If we go above that, the active space is about the 750, 800,000 rand mark. People are affording that. Gauteng in particular is the economic center of gravity. People are always moving in. People are looking for places to rent. I'm staggered every time I go there and look around how much more affordable accommodation is coming into the market. People are just pouring into Gauteng. It's urbanizing, and people are accessing those opportunities. But as you go higher with interest rates and interest rate sensitivities, if you look at a property 2-3 million, the market is bleak in Gauteng because people are selling there and then they're relocating, going to Cape Town, and then the Cape Town prices are as scary, if not scarier, than Harare prices. So South Africa is a different market with different pockets and different segments.
And when we talk of housing, then because you're describing South Africa that's partly different from the South Africa you have people, you hear stories, so like, what's the government then doing to actually try get rid of that side?
So political football, housing is a core competence of the provincial government. So South Africa's got 9 provinces, and they have premiers who have a legislature. So you have like a mini parliament for your provinces. The funding isn't necessarily there, and it depends on the political will of the party. But then it becomes difficult where if you create excellence in delivery, you only get more people requesting it. So Cape Town, the DA guys will love to tell you, oh, we've done so much. It's because people are running away, economic refugees from Eastern Cape run by the ANC, and they're flooding us here in the Western Cape. The reality is there's so much inward migration. A colleague of mine gave me the great expression. He says, not so much urbanization, it's townification. So, Gaia, I don't know how recently you've driven across the border from Beitbridge into Musina. Musina, Toyando, all of those towns, because there's a economic activity, Zimbabweans are pouring over in hordes to buy whatever. People have migrated from a rural lifestyle. They're now in town, they're hustling, they're selling whatever it is, be it themselves, be it supplies, be it whatever. But those little towns don't have the capacity to double sewer, to double power. So there's a crisis in South Africa where unplanned and the demands on infrastructure are moving faster than the providers of capital can move. So you've got those mashaks because that's a temporary, I can do it in a week. If we do it in numbers, 300 of us invade this plot, then we get the councillor who wants to support us because he wants our vote, then he runs some political protection on us. So you've got those dynamics in the bottom end of the South African market.
Okay, coming back home, right? How do what lessons are there to be learned from, like the Hassans and Sons and the Indian community? Because they've got a hold on downtown property and stuff. What do they get right when it comes to property buying?
You're reminding me of my late Mbuya. Should come into town and should say, would be waiting to collect a check from the GMB, and should always give me $20, which is an amazing amount of money. But then Mdara would say, indana gogo wako downtown monotenga something, right? We drive into town and you see the geography, right? You're on, I'll give away my age, Kingsway.
All right.
Julius Nyerere. On this side of Julius Nyerere, you got 20-story buildings. On the southern side of Julius Nyerere, you just don't have that. So that was generational wealth that was created by an apartheid system where I believe the first black Avurestoro Mudoroba was Chanakira. And he did that under some other white guy. I believe it was in Ferry days, if I've got my history correct. There was a specific and deliberate policy to exclude black people from ownership. So the concentration of Indian ownership of wealth in that part of town is an economic history outcome. What we have done and what we've managed to do, and I'm very proud, and remember, Wanaboka vachitenga ma buildings, and guys started to see the jet and started buying and building. Gratefully, Anasekuru wangu in Kingdom Bank or Trust Bank then were providing loans for black people to start owning the means of production. And we had that glorious period where, yes, there were majet achirowa, but we now had the financed acquisition of long-term assets by black people and meaningful participation.
All right. Do we have, you touched on finances, right? And do you feel like we have enough to finance big major projects? How long it took how long did it take for Joina City to actually be up?
12 years. Yeah.
And then right now, currently, there is that bank Afrizim Bank. Do you think that we have enough to finance major big projects? Right now, we talk of even a venue, conference venue in Harare is a stress. You know what I mean? We've got the HICC, but we could do with a major. Do you think we have maybe the Batoka coach? Or do you think we have enough to actually finance big projects?
All right. Remember our earlier conversation of the cycle of capital. Alex and Kura and Henry working, we give up some of our money to go into our pension fund. Our pension fund goes to an asset manager. The asset manager invests. The investment gives us the job. If we're looking at that circle and say that's where money comes from, where are our savings? Our savings are, call it the pension funds. The pension funds in Zimbabwe currently, and I was with the Actuary Society not too long ago, the inflows into pension funds are $10 million a month. Right? So let's have a modest expectation of what that money can do. So even if all of it came into investment, in a year, we've got 120 million, right? It's not a lot of money. Look at our Diaspora remittances. Those are sitting at 2 billion a year. How are we capturing that? Or are we creating assets out of a cash flow? And I think we need to elevate our thinking to say, what instruments are there where, I'm not saying deny people, but we create assets. The accountants will tell you, is the short-term sacrifice of something for economic value and benefit in the future. Unless we change our mindset, and unless we create a safe space for money to live and be free, we're not yet there to fund the significant projects that we need to do, because our local capital base is not bigger. And the expression is correct. You don't get a foreigner jumping over everybody to come and bail you out. He wants to see, what are you doing? And then what real estate is always a local game. If you're the local guy, what are you doing? How can we support? How can we do lines of credit? And where we're going together. But Ane Gwara, Anopa Mumwe Gwara is the local guy. And I don't think we're thinking big enough. We're not capitalized big enough. If you look at the mega merger of the banks that are happening, they said, look, we need to be of a significant size to attract capital at a certain scale. I understand and I relate to that.
No, but okay, when you're speaking of merger, right, like when we hear like things like, the merger between the CBZs and the...
That's what I'm referring to.
That is a step in the right direction, right? Are you saying that it's a progressive move, yes, but is it possible for us to actually then finance all this without outside financing?
Where does the money come from? So money is a circular thing. It's like electricity. In studio, we've got lights. An engineer will explain to you, power is a grid. You rent electricity. ZESA, Kariba pushes out power, but it comes back. Electricity comes in and out, and you're charged for what you use. So money is a similar thing. Where is that money coming from for it to be put aside to do this as opposed to anything else? So when you list a real estate investment trust, you've taken money from people and you said, no, we've put it in this building and you own a share of it, and every quarter you're going to get your dividend. I'm questioning where those significant pots of capital are sitting, and I'm arguing with the data point that we don't have significant pots of capital. If you look at our total loan book, I think we're not even at $1 billion something in US dollars in lending. I don't think we're there. So I don't see where the money is.
And across the region, right, we always we're seeing like SADC, there's been measures with the Italians, with the Chinese. Is there anything that SADC can do to actually stop that, so that at least we can take up all that construction for ourselves and trade within ourselves and actually invest within ourselves when it comes to that market?
That would be lovely. Great concept. We've got the Continental Free Trade Area, which is theoretically promoting that. We've historically had South African companies, Costain, Murray and Roberts, whoever, a dollar that needs to be earned. So if you can provide, money is really, really simple. Money, if you can provide a home where it can look after itself with set rules and give a steady return, it'll come. So if you're not providing that, how many people do you know amongst your set have said, Kura, I've got $30,000. I want to buy something in South Africa. I just want to diversify my risk. I want to have something outside of Zim, because 80 Samora Michelle might just be able to say, we've gone back to Zig, or we're just exclusively on Zig. So until we've got the environment where we look after people's money on a long-term basis, 3 years is not a long-term basis. You don't create confidence by saying with immediate effect, and you get a certain blue and yellow letterhead changing your world that you can't even eat breakfast after that, because your fundamental financial structure has changed so radically. You can't explain that in Joburg. I ran a company here with South African management and UK shareholders to try and explain to them Zig, to try and explain to them official rate and why I collected dollars. They shouted at me from London, why do you collect dollars in cash? That's an audit risk. Yeah, you can get robbed. And I said, okay, but if I took the money in ZIG and then we had the money in ZIG, it would lose value. And then when you try and do something, I can't even pay my people because I can't keep up with the cost of living as we're going into COVID. I was saying, guys, I need to give these guys double what I gave them last month. They can't understand that. And the world will not slow down its pace to try and understand the idiosyncrasies of Zimbabwe. It'll just say, that place, too small, too complicated, too uncertain, actually. And then they sit with their money.
But you're always saying that, always like on Twitter, money is moving, and when I'm always moving around, right?
Sure.
I've seen money moving, like you like, especially whether it's Harare, right? Any direction, pointed any direction in Harare. Whether you find construction happening. Yeah. Tell me what's going on and explain, because you right now you can't be telling me aparamari. The next minute I'm seeing things that need money to happen. What's happening?
All right. Let me qualify when I say that aparamari, the scale of things. Right. There's in that circle of how is money created. I argue that a lot of the energy in our property market was a godsend, right? Call it my mom and dad were teachers. They weren't teachers, but let's theorize them that they were teachers. They got a mortgage from Cabs and they bought a property in Sunningdale or St. Mary's. But they were paying nonsense Zim dollars. Then you inflated that away in 2008.
No, Zim dollars and nonsense. Let's just correct that statement just for so that we just for clarity and for safety reasons. That
unit of measure that had 27 zeros and some of them were cut off and then they came back like cats.
That was a better check. I was just talking about the Zim dollar. We just need to.
No, Zim dollar is historical. We're not in ZIG. We're not in ZIG. So this is historical.
All
right. So
the Zim dollar is that $20 that your granny used to give you. That's a Zim dollar.
But that was a real currency. It was that the Bero, Agro, that period.
Yeah.
But you know the period. The building society calls up and says, we're aiming to my deeds. So they come and pick up their deeds. Now they got this piece of paper. That piece of paper, they never put in US dollars, right? But in St. Mary's, you can sell a property there for 35, 40 grand. Very real dollars. Right after those very real dollars, they have something to do. So I think that is where our energy and impetus for this trade in US dollars has come in. Add to that, not many people convert remittances into savings, but there's money that's flowing around. So if I have got a leg up where I've created a US dollar asset that I can now leverage against, or call my kid in Canada and say, hey, my guy, I want to do student accommodation at the back of my house in Mount Pleasant. You've now got economic activity, and those smalls, those $100 rooms then creates the appetite for the creation of a capital asset. And then that capital asset, of course, some people have money, and I had the pleasure of meeting a young white guy, and he was explaining the dynamics of, hey, my Bali was on the farm, then we got kicked off, then I went to school, then I've come back to Zim, and but I lease the farm and I do 1, 2, 3. Then you get to insight to how is money made, and when that money is made, can I think it's Madomast Forge Chibage? He says, look, I made 60 grand, 80 grand, 100 grand. I put it in property. Then they form a syndicate and they go to a site and they put up clusters. That 100 grand, 100% profit. They get the 200 grand, about 200 grand, and they do something and expand. So the kind of developments that we're seeing, I believe, are self-funded like that or syndicately funded. Then you've got corporates. I handled a corporate disposal by a bank. They just took a view, hey, this is property. We actually don't need property in Chiredzi, Gweru, wherever. They flog, they got dollars. Then they're now, no, it's not them. And other banks have taken a view to build headquarters in Borrowdale to say that what can we do with the money that we have to store value?
This is the bank that's building.
No. I take the fifth.
It's the bank that's building the item here.
There are 5 banks that are building items here.
No, I'm just saying, they're okay, but I'm saying, okay, this is the guys by the corner there.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know which corner you're talking about.
And Explain to me. There's something that's near and dear to your heart. That's like student accommodation, and then you think that's the next big thing. Tell me. Explain that whole science to me.
Wow. Look, my varsity experience was fantastic, and it was because you're in res and you've left your mother's breast, and you're actually growing up and dropping a pair of balls and making a plan for your life. So as you start giving young people independence and sovereignty, and that starts with the place that they stay. So we are chronically undersupplied in beds. I can't give you the absolute numbers here, but if you've seen some of the horrors that are in Alex Park or Mount Pleasant around UZ, if you go to Bindura and you see what our students are being forced to live in, I just say, look, man, can we not make a plan and put some sort of reasonable capital behind providing our kids a reasonable place to stay? The plan is real estate is derived, or real estate value is derived over time by appropriate use. The varsities are not going to go anywhere. The need for education is not going to go anywhere. So you're going to have a very long and strong symbiotic relationship where you'll always find tenants. And if we can provide decent accommodation, not Madura wall, and we put 4 students in there and say we're doing student accommodation, do it at scale, do it properly. IDBZ has done some nice stuff. First Mutual Life has done some nice stuff. There are players in the space who've got, it's not, I'm not even expecting them to be philanthropic, but just provide real estate that's appropriate to that particular market. And then that gives us a better learning experience, and then gives our kids something better to look forward to.
You know, the other time I was passing by, I was passing by, it was a boat house, you know what I mean? And I was like,
Newlands, yeah?
And then I was just like, yo, design. And, you know, like right now, currently, you've got guys like TDW, Troika, people who are actually enhancing and moving forward in designing and actually, you know, making strides and moves, right? And you have even other people copying them, right? You were someone who's actually like seen a lot of property, like comparing the new guys of the block in terms of design in the colonial style. What would you go for?
Wow, Wandisa Patait. Look, property is a ladder, and I love that idiom, right? Where you start is not where you're going to finish, right? You don't drive a D4D straight out of college, right? Honda Fit, you know, and then you graduate. So horses for courses. I'm at a stage in my life where my kids are grown, one left to leave the house. So the 2-acre property, 4-bedroom house is not a necessity. 2 bedrooms, I'm bored, right? So it depends on where you are in your life cycle and then your tastes. So if you can afford it, absolutely. Do the house on the hills, live in the burbs and roll like a boss, absolutely. But if you are an older person, I was doing evaluation the other day for a couple. They're like, hey, our kids are grown. The 6 bedrooms, we don't need them. We just need somewhere safe and secure. You want it on one level because one of them is going to get old and need a stroller. So property is time appropriate. So your style is going to be your dictates. Personally, I don't like open plan kitchens. So the property I've recently purchased has a closed kitchen, but it's a 2-bedroom apartment and it does what it needs to do. I've got a garden in the front. It's a communal setup. So that works for me because I can be here for 2 weeks. I can be in Joburg for 2 weeks. No mess, no fuss. I'm not stressing. If I left that big house on the hill, I might have a different issue. So it's personal, specific, what is your style and taste. But the youngsters these days, hey, I guess there's the excitement of moving into your first spot. If it's a studio apartment in Millennium Heights, good for you. You're making progress. First hand on the first step on the ladder. Never judge a person making progress, however slow. But what you like versus what I like.
Say never what?
Never judge a person making progress, however slow. I would love to say that was my quotation, but nah, it's not. My WhatsApp group motivations
on the purchase. So you know, like I always hear in Indino, which you remember when I quit my suit to UK, like back in the day, like this is 2001. Some people won't even relate to this line, but remember people used to borrow suits and then they'll get deported. You know, like back in the days, you would celebrate that somebody's in the UK like 5 days later with, oh, no, azopinda anakudzoka, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And those people worked hard and sent money back thinking they were buying properties only to get home and find out that what advice can you actually give to people who are abroad when it comes to like property investment in this country? And is it a good time for them to actually like come back home and like invest at home?
Okay. I'm always criticized. My industry is always criticized. You know, if you ask an agent, it's a good time to buy. Yes. So let's not take that view. I think running up and down as I do between here and SA, the question is often, could I want to come back home? I want to make a plan to come back home. And I say, just make a rational economic decision. If you're wanting to come back home, make sure you've got a plan, right? Because Zim is hard, right? So Zim is hard for those who are here, and it's particularly hard for those trying to re-enter, because just ka mindset, ka nimbleness, ka connectedness in Zim, everybody is 2 or 3 phone calls away. If something needs to happen, you know, to get to the CEO of the bank, and then you can link up. So you got to know the terrain that you're in. If you're investing, please, nyacela, do it properly with reputable people. Go and find people who will provide a real service. You've got the building material suppliers, they've got desks. Then you can get a proper bill of quantities out, and you can pay your dollars from your UK account into this account, and then your contractor picks it up and does the delivery. Yes, there's a chink in the chain where if you're sending your uncle to go and pick it up, you've paid for 20 bags of cement. I can't guarantee you 20 bags of cement is going to arrive on site. Or if you say, is going to, it becomes messy. But try and buy a turnkey package. And there's a good outreach by 2 players. They've come down to South Africa. They've been to the UK. They've done Dubai. They're going to do Texas, I believe, in the next quarter, where financial institutions, property suppliers, developers actually going to the diaspora and sitting down. So you can now see ningi, and you can actually conclude transactions where you've got a clear path to documentation. I love documentation. If you try and buy a property in South Africa, dude, you'll do, I was trying to count it, about 78 pages of documentation that you must read, sign, countersign, have attested to. Be as rigorous as that. Don't just say, I've heard. Don't go on Facebook and say on Facebook Marketplace, I heard and I saw. Do your due diligence. Who owns the ground? What terms are they supplying it at? Who's going to build? How do you project manage? How do you manage costs? Who have you got overseeing that? Who so sure I can get so and so. So pick the brands, and the brands who've done stuff. You've mentioned a couple of them. Stuff that you can see, feel, and touch. Those are the Makoya people. Stick with them. I'm not trying to cut out the small guy who's trying to do a hustle and he's trying to build something, but the risk is too great. Your savings are so valuable to you. Don't risk it. Go with proper people.
And you know, like you mentioned, that congratulations on the property you recently bought, right?
Thanks.
Something came in my mind when you said that. And Semuna no dilane kanzuru sitting. What's the longest period of time you've been on the waiting list? What will be happening? Because the funny thing is that I'm on a waiting list, but aside fence, there's a certain fence, guys. Those guys are getting guap.
Yeah.
And then you just see someone else. Like, what's the process of that? Can you explain that whole waiting list? Is it a scam? What's going on? I know the Buddha must in there.
Yeah. You didn't prepare me for these questions. This is hard talk. Welcome to Hard Talk with Tim Sebastian. Look, the policy is if a council is selling land, it must do it in a public process. When it does it as a public process, they're supposed to say, it's in a waiting list. You went and signed up and you said, I am Alex, I am Kura, and I want to buy a stand. The shortest one that I've seen was done in Victoria Falls, where they said, look, we're going to do these stands, but they were quite upfront and clear. And they said, okay, for us to do these stands, yes, the obligations that are on us, the road, the sewer, the what have you. But it's not so when you're buying, muchaita top up, you quit these things. But to limit access to that scheme, or not even limit access, to be compliant with the law. They said you have to sign up on the waiting list. So I can't remember what it was, $10, $50, whatever. You put that money in and you join the waiting list, and then you are visibly seen to be somebody who came through the front door rather than blaza kangopita ne envelope.
Is it that fancy joint that's said kunena Zambezi boutique?
No.
Bastions are before I know Kura national team.
I believe it was the old airstrip side.
Oh,
medium density.
Kura Chihota, two things that you love about this country, besides our beautiful flag and our national anthem. What are the two things that you love about this beautiful country?
You know, every time I go away, I just miss banter. You know, Urba service station or that wadi wangu. You know, so being in context, being at home, being a Zimbabwean, connecting with your people in vernacular, fantastic thing. You're not in South Africa looking over your shoulder, who's going to stab me, who's going to knife me. Not that it's like that pervasively everywhere, but being home. People died for this country to give us what we have, that we can accumulate assets, that we can talk freely as we are right now. We can share knowledge. So it's full circle. You were shown the path, show the path to others, and it gives me context and joy to be in Zim.
Kura Chihota, thanks a lot for coming through on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, if you were offended, that was the actual intention. If you were impressed and inspired, that was the intention too, to start a conversation. This has been the Bold Exchange. Out.